Welcome everyone to our panel on directors, Broadway and off-Broadway actually. And I'm so thrilled to have everyone here on this panel. We ended up expanding, which is hugely exciting. My name is Ruthie Fierberg. I'm the Senior Features Editor at Playbill, and I am so excited to welcome you. We have masters of the craft up here today, and it's my thrill to be able to talk to you all about what you do. These are people who do plays, musicals, originals, revivals. It's exciting. So to introduce everyone, I'm going to start all the way on the end. We have Mr. Jeff Calhoun. Tony-nominated director, choreographer, has worked on such shows as The Will Rogers Follies, Best Little Whorehouse Goes Public, Grease, Annie Get Your Gun, Bells Are Ringing. He was the director choreographer of Big River, as well as Bonnie and Clyde, as well as the director of Newsies. I'm sure people in this audience are happy to hear. And Jacqueline Hyde, and he has a new musical coming to off-Broadway with Between the Lines. If any of you saw the first look yesterday, Jessica Kay sang for that. So thank you, Jeff, for being here with us. We have Miss Tyne Rafaeli, who I am so beyond thrilled. She's doing such exciting work. She began on Broadway, at least, with being the associate director to Bartlett Shear on his productions of The King and I and Fiddler on the Roof. But I am a big fan of her directing work from I Was Most Alive with You, at Playwrights Raisin's. Usual Girls is still one of my favorite things I've ever seen at Roundabout Underground, and most recently with Power Strip by a new playwright named Sylvia Corey, who's amazing, as well as I saw her out-of-town production, Good Speed of Chasing Rainbows, so musicals as well. Thank you, Tyne, for joining us. Miss Kathleen Marshall, a three-time Tony Award winner. She began as an assistant choreographer with Kiss of the Spider Woman, has done such shows as Swinging on a Star, 1776, Kiss Me Kate, Seussical, Little Shop of Horrors, was the director, choreographer of Wonderful Town, The Pajama Game, Anything Goes, Living on Love, In Transit, and she has the unsinkable Molly Brown coming to the Transport Group off-Broadway. Thank you, Kathleen, for being here. Sammi Cannold, if any of you saw the New York City Center production of Evita, this is the woman behind that new vision. She has been the associate on Natasha Pierre and the Great Comet of 1812. She has worked on productions off-Broadway. Endlings is a play that's coming to New York Theater Workshop. She did the groundbreaking moment of Ragtime on Ellis Island, which is cool in site-specific theater, so thank you, Sammi, for being here with us. And of course, Mr. Kenny Leon, I am so thrilled to have you here, a Tony Award winner for A Raisin in the Sun, which you have actually directed twice on Broadway, which is very cool, as well as such August Wilson plays like Gem of the Ocean, Radio Golf Fences, and then with new playwrights like Stickfly, Holler If You Hear Me, and most recently American Son last season, and currently a Soldier's Play at Roundabout Theater Company. It's incredible. He's also done Hairspray Live and The Wiz Live, and got an Emmy nomination for Hairspray, so welcome, Mr. Kenny Leon. I want to dive in, and I want to know what your first professional job as a director was. Who said yes to you? And why do you think they said yes to you? Go for it, Jeff.
Hi everybody. My first job directing was out west. I was in a Broadway musical called My One and Only, and starring Tommy Tune. And I replaced Tommy Tune when he went away to direct the national tour of a musical called Nine. And so I replaced him and got the good fortune of marrying Twiggy 16 times and dancing with the legendary Honey Coles. But anyway, and I closed the door after that on my performing career because I thought that was a fluke and it would probably never happen again where I would have such an opportunity, because I wasn't really that good of a singer, to be quite frank with you. I wouldn't have hired me. But what I did is I used that to catapult my directing career. I went out west and people hired me to direct that show. At any dinner theater, I did it anywhere they would have me, because when they hired me, they got the original Broadway choreography and direction. But because you're dealing with different actors and different theaters, the physicality of the set, different set, that's when I started getting the directing chops, because although I took Tommy Toom's original work, you start to mold it for the occasion. And I guess that was sort of my, debut, figuring out how to do that, yeah.
I think we're on.
We're on?
Yes.
Great. I was working with Bart Shear, who I met at grad school, and I never anticipated or planned on being an assistant or an associate. So as I started working with him, I knew that it was my priority to always direct, to direct continually through my assistant experience. And so I hit the streets and hustled. And I knew someone at Classic Stage Company downtown, and they used to do this extraordinary education program where they would bring thousands upon thousands of inner city high school kids to their tiny black box space downtown and present them with a 90-minute Shakespeare built specifically for them. So the year that I was hustling to find my first directing gig in New York, they were doing Midsummer Night's Dream. And so I went in there and pitched them this Midsummer Night's Dream built specifically for these kids, many of whom had never been to the theatre before, most of whom had never seen Shakespeare before. And I have a real passion about breaking down any assumptions about Shakespeare, and we wove in hip-hop and rap and dance and lots of improvisation, and made this Midsummer Night's Dream for these kids. And it was the most electrifying audience I have experienced and have yet to experience, when you have 215-year-olds going crazy for Shakespeare. There's nothing like it.
Quick question before we move on to Kathleen, because I think it's common that you start as I said, as an assistant or an associate. And having met Bart at grad school, what was your case for pick me to work with?
It was interesting. I had only recently moved to New York, and I knew nothing about, very little about the New York theatre landscape. So he came to talk to my class at Columbia, and I remember vividly Googling Bartlett Shear, not knowing how to spell it, on my way to this class, because I just hadn't been around long enough to really know. And so I hadn't actually seen anything he had directed. But he came in and he spoke to my class for 2 hours, and I was so struck by how he spoke about the work that he does, process, his frame of references, just the way in which he spoke about what he does and why he does it was so compelling to me that I turned to Anne Bogart and said, I have to meet this guy. And so it was very early on in my New York experience, and you can't manufacture these things. These relationships have to be organic. And so we just started talking about what it is that we do and formed a real friendship, collegial friendship and relationship. And then he brought me on board for Golden Boy on Broadway while I was still at grad school, and that was my entry point to the American theatre, so I was incredibly lucky.
Wow. Kathleen, what about for you?
Well, like Jeff, I think all of us sort of director choreographers, we have a sort of similar path. All of us were at one point performers, dancers, usually became dance captains, became associates. You were an associate to Tommy Toon, I was an associate to my brother Rob. And so actually the first time I directed on my own in New York was actually the artistic director at Encores. And I'd choreographed things, but I hadn't directed anything yet. And we were doing Babes in Arms. And I'd gone to 4 or 5 different directors, and nobody wanted to sort of take it on. And I went to Judith Dakin, who was the executive director of the City Center at the time, and said, I think I have a way into this. And Rob Fisher, who was the musical director at the time, and they said, okay, go ahead. And so basically I kind of hired myself.
That's a good way to get a job. What about you, Sammi?
I directed a production of the musical Violet in college that was site-specific. It was on a bus. When I got to New York, I directed a number of readings, but the first production that I got to direct was a production of Violet, and the way that came about was I was working at the American Repertory Theater first as an intern, then as a PA, then as an assistant director, then as an associate director for Diane Paulus. And I done various jobs there for 4 years, and then I was like, maybe I could pitch this thing because it feels very much in the world of ART, and I did, and they put it in the season. But I think that's one of the things that I love so much about the ART is that they are so focused on expanding the boundaries of what they do, and so focused on giving opportunities.
I was going to say, but also that there's a pipeline there.
There's absolutely a pipeline. I mean, there was definitively a process towards getting that opportunity, and that was in the season of their second space, which is called Oberon. And then 2 seasons later, they let me direct a play on their main stage. So it was that progression of working up at one specific institution for me.
What about you, Kenny?
Hey, y'all. Hey. I actually was a pretty good actor. And I was in this company in Atlanta, the Academy of Music and Theater. And then I had the first opportunity because they would let different actors in the company direct a play. So I directed this play called The Wishing Place. And it was a play that had all kind of shit. It was like snow and leaves in the living room. And it was, but I did it, and it was like, I had this feeling I hadn't ever felt before. And at that time I had, because I looked a certain way at a certain time, I had done billboards, television, I was doing Richard III at night. But when I directed that play, like when I was acting, I felt like a slice of the pie. And I just got to figure out how that slice fits. But once I directed, I felt like, oh my God, I got to know how sweet the potatoes are, and what's the pan like, and how much sugar, and how much salt, and I was like, oh my God. And the artistic director said to me, I don't think, Kenny, that you have the skills to direct. We want you back next year as an actor, but I don't think you have the skills to direct. And at that time, I said, okay, I'm out. And that was after 8 years in that company, and I left and I started a woman, Timothy Neer, saw my work, and I was working with the homeless population. I was directing homeless people, acting skills. And long story short, the National Endowment for the Arts had a program, a directing fellowship program. And I became one of the 6 directors to be in that fellowship program, and I went on to become a successful director.
And another reason why the NEA is important. You're talking about that feeling that you got. What signals to you that you're right for a project? Or what are you looking for when you choose, if you're in a position to choose your next project? What is the thing that you're like, it's me, I'm the right perspective for this? Kenny, you
well, for me, I always look for, it has to move me as a person, a human being on the planet. And then I have to say, what's the chances that this will impact other people? And so I'm very careful about what I'm saying to the world. And when I approach a revival of a play, I look at it as it's a new play. So I'm doing a Soldier's play now on Broadway, and I was like, does this have something to say to us today?
Right, because it's the Pulitzer Prize winning play.
Yeah, so when I leave my house and I see the impeachment inquiry, I could draw a line straight from 1945 till today. And I end this production with a tune by Nipsey Hussle. And a lot of people watching it don't know that that's Nipsey Hussle, who's a hip-hop artist who always returned to his community, who was killed in his community last year. So I make that play fresh by bringing Nipsey Hussle into a play about 1944, written in 1980.
Right, and we were talking about how like there's the 40-year bookends where it takes place in 1944, 40-ish years later in 1982 is when the play was produced. It was written down, but it takes place in 44, and now 40 years later we have the revival, which is actually the first Broadway production of it.
Right, so I'm always trying to figure out what are the people in the seats today, what is this gonna mean to their lives when they leave the theater? If it doesn't have a chance of impacting them in their daily life now, then I'm probably not interested.
But what is about, and whether you want to comment on a Soldier's play or another piece of your work, that you said it's not just that a soldier's play needs to be done, but a soldier's play needs to be done. I have something that I can offer to this.
Well, I think a director has to have an idea, because people, like Hairspray Live, there's television, but we had 800 people on crew. And I have to take 800 people up a mountain. And actors and designers and crew, they want to follow someone. Why should I follow this person? So I have to step in the room. I got an idea, I got a concept, and there's room for everybody to collaborate on it to make something that hasn't been made before. When I did Hairspray Live, the most important scene in that musical for me was Jennifer Hudson singing, I Know Where I've Been. If you take that out of the show, I'm not interested in the show. And so me and J. Hud talked about that. So every time, like even a Raisin in the Sun, I did it twice on Broadway. To do it once with P. Diddy is very different than 10 years later to do it with Denzel Washington. So I'm not trying to recreate the same play. I'm trying to say, what does this play mean now? So the Denzel Washington's production had a more intimate feel. We moved the stage closer to the audience so they could feel like this hits me now. So, you know, but it always has, I have to see it and I have to be able to articulate it to a team. And there has to be room for everyone to collaborate to help create something that nobody really had.
Sammi, you've worked on like these revivals of musicals like you're saying, so I assume there's something that's calling to you and them. But then again, what is the moment that you say, this is what I have to offer to this? Or even in the case of Endlings, where it's a new thing and you're presented with a script that you think, okay, I have something to say here.
Yeah, I think in the case of a revival like Evita, and I think this is probably true of most, if not all directors, that you have those shows that are like you're just dying to get to, and Evita was that show for me. It has always been my favorite show, and I always knew, I mean not always, but as of like 5-6 years ago, knew what I wanted to say. And I think that I was so lucky that I had mentors that were saying to me, don't just do the show to do the show because you have something specific to say about it, and that's why we did the production that we did. But in the case of Endlings and a few other new plays that I've been working on, in those cases I read them and immediately seen what I think they look like in my head. And I think that part of that is that, I guess what I'm starting to learn is that I think I know what I'm bad at, and I think I have a sense of what I'm better than bad at. And so, like, if I read a two-hander, I know pretty quickly that I'm going to be bad at it because I live in a world mostly of physical complexity, and my training is in musicals, and my training is not in complex text work. And so I think that knowing what form you live most in is something that has been helping me to gravitate in one direction or another, but I think I'm very much learning about how you navigate that question.
Kathleen, what about for you? When you take, I mean, you have such a long resume.
Well, you know, I mostly work on musicals, so, you know, besides having sort of characters in a story that you think audiences are going to be interested in or going to care about, I think it's always important in a musical, in any story, to have characters that you care about and that you're rooting for. But it's also the music. It's also, you know, whether it's a revival or a new piece. Music that is exciting, that is, you know, there's nothing better than whether it's a revival or a new piece, when you have a piece of music or an idea for a show or for a particular number, and you can't wait to give it to an audience. Because it's like having a great Christmas present that you can't wait to see somebody open. When you have some sort of thing that you know is going to surprise and delight and amuse and maybe move or touch an audience. And you know you can wrap it up in this little bow and give it to them. And there's nothing better than sort of feeling standing at the back of the house, knowing, oh wait, we've got a surprise for you coming up that you don't know is coming, and it's coming around the corner. And to see an entire audience of people react, or, you know, in the same sort of, you know, with pleasure or delight or surprise or emotion is fantastic. And so that's what I feel I look for. I look for shows that I think can offer a sort of series of delights for an audience.
Tyne, I know that particularly recently I've seen you working with new playwrights in Sylvia Corrigan and in Piper. And so what is it about when you read their works that you think, I know what to do with this?
I mean, much like Kenny was saying, when I read a new play, I have to be able to articulate why this should be produced for myself. You know, I think answering that question at this moment in terms of the global political climate and what we're experiencing globally.
Jeff, what about you?
Yeah, I second pretty much what everybody says. I think it's a common thing. For me, you know, when you first start out, you don't have the luxury of saying what I'm going to choose. You have to say yes to everything and anything. But if you are fortunate enough to get to that point where you can choose and pick, for me it has to have heart. I'm not as political as some of the people up here as far as my career is concerned. But it has to have heart and it has to move me. And I think a large part of the key to success is knowing your shortcomings as well as knowing what you can do. So in other words, if I'm going to stay away from Shakespeare, I'm going to say, often I get scripts and I go, I'm not the best person for this. There are other people that can do this better. I have to feel like I can do this show better than anyone else to be brave enough to attempt it.
But what makes you that person that when you know you are the right person, it's because of?
For me, it's because when I'm reading it, I laugh out loud or I cry and I have to see something. I work in terms of, I'm not as articulate as I am visual. I consider myself more a visualist. My job is to support the text visually and have it come alive three-dimensionally. But I have to see a metaphor. I have to know, I have to see it. Usually every show I've done, I've actually seen my mind's eye as I'm reading it. And if that doesn't happen, I know I'm not really the person for it. I mean, I couldn't touch any of the plays that I've seen on Kenny. I mean, why would I do that? We have any Kenny in this world. So I do think a large part of success is knowing what you excel at, but also knowing what you don't excel at.
Yeah. I think one of the things I always want to emphasize about the profession of directing is really what it is. Because I think it's like, okay, a lighting designer, I see lights. A costume designer, I see clothing. A choreographer, I see dance, which I spoke about this morning, how it's much more than just the dance, but these are the things I can point to. And then we get to direction, and no one knows where to point. And so, and the thing is, it's because it's all of it. Like you are the decision maker, you are, like you said, the leader. It is your vision. So I want to talk a little bit about like what is it like being in the room to shape that vision and work with I guess the first step that you guys really take after picking, your writers or getting a script or what have you is designers. So how do you go about choosing your collaborators? What are you looking for? Do you, when you're saying, you think very visually, are you looking for someone who can just fulfill that picture, or is there something more that you have to find?
Well, I look at theater, when I read a play, it's sculptural to me. Mm-hmm. It's all sculptural. And I think that's because of my dance background. And as a choreographer, you see things sculpturally. That's why I think also we're good drivers. Because you have, for real, I have 360 degree, almost. You're very good at peripheral vision. Even though if you're looking here and talking to your friend, you're in that mirror, you're in that mirror, you're in that mirror. You know what's around you. And I think that's what a director has to be, 360 degree vision, really. So it's sculptural, and choosing designers is no different than choosing a husband or a wife. It's a collaboration. And you're just looking for it's the same as casting. People ask, what are you looking for when you cast? And to be honest, I'm looking for someone that I would date. Because you're asking the audience to spend basically a 2.5-hour date with that person. So is this someone I want to hang out with? Not only for the 2.5 hours, but for the 8 weeks prior to that. So for me, picking designers is no different than, picking someone you want to go out with. You have to speak the same language. They have to complement your shortcomings and enhance what you do well. And I've been lucky because I don't know about you guys, but I like to use the same people. I guess that's loyalty, but it's also when you find a dancing partner like Fred, stayed with Ginger.
Right.
When you find something that works, I trade that in.
I was wondering about that because I think that there's something to be said for when you find your band. You're not going to break up a band, right? And there's a chemistry there and there's a shorthand, but at the same time, there's a need to replenish the industry and to bring new voices in. How do you navigate when you feel like you can do that or when you feel like you need the people you've always worked with?
Well, for me, it's about relationships. And it's also about being in the world. So for instance, on Broadway, it's very hard for young folks to get in,
Right.
and it's hard for diversity is a big issue on Broadway. So I make it my business to like, okay, my team is going to be diverse, racially, culturally, gender-wise. And so I try to, like, say if I work with Derek McLean a lot as a set designer, I'll make sure that the lighting designer is a new person that I haven't worked with. I'm always interested in what I don't know. And I'm also interested in generational diversity. So my best friend's name is Samuel L. Jackson, and I'm not dropping names, but
We're okay with that.
but what Sam always says, you know, he had his first big film, and he was 45 years old. He says, Leon, we got to stay relevant. Isn't it great to be relevant and not one of those guys that are going to do stuff for 10 years and disappear? I said, yes. So for me to be relevant, I'm always like, I want to know. I'm interested in what I don't know. So if I'm with a 30-year-old, I want to know what are you listening to? What's your poetry? What's on your music list? And then that finds its way in the story because I didn't know that. Or you know, if I got a 70-year-old, like Harvey, let's talk about this, man. I don't know what this means. So I like to mix it up. So every time I'm exploring something that's going to make me a better human being too.
Tyne, I see you just nodding your head a lot. I don't know if you want to add anything specific or if you just second all of it.
I mean, I certainly second the like very deliberate and conscious effort to diversify my teams as much as I can, along all the same lines that Kenny just named. It's interesting, I think about my designers, and I've been thinking more and more about this. They're really like, they're dramaturgs who happen to express their dramaturgical instinct through clothing or through lighting or through sound. And they have become, the ones who I work with regularly, have become my most valuable counsel. They are my counsel on my own practice and my own work and what I'm putting out into the world, and I rely on them as much as I rely on my family to hold me accountable as a human. I find my design team holds me accountable as an artist.
I agree, and I always feel like, you know, I always think that the hardest thing to direct is taste. Because so if you have people who don't have the same taste as you, you know, and especially if you're doing comedy, if somebody has, you know, if somebody's, you know, has a broader or campy sense of comedy than you do, and it's that's always hard to sort of navigate. But so having people who basically you have the same taste, even if it can be wildly different tastes, but you sort of appreciate the same things. But what you're saying about keeping counsel with your designers, and I always feel like with designers and with your whole creative team, with your music team, your music department, because you know you're always hoping that if you're absolutely sort of going off the rails, that somehow they'll perform an intervention, right? That somehow your design team and your music team and the writers will be like, I don't think this is, you know, that you sort of...
Right, you're the driver, but they're holding the map.
Right, but you're hoping that everybody around you, some people say, look, you know, that's not working, or that's not making sense, or, you know, that's confusing, or, you know, whatever it is, and you're right, that hopefully, what you want is a team of people who are experts in their area, but who care about the whole, who care about everything.
I'm also wondering, you know, the director is the role that bridges it all. So you're working with designers, you're working with the writers to shape what the story is, and then you turn around and you work with the actors to say this is how we perform it, this is how we interpret it, which I think, you know, when I make so many parallels to the way we grew up in theater, where the director just has the script and it's already all done. So that is the difference between like what's happening up here is they're making it. And the director is not just handed, you know, you're not just handed, I don't know, Mark Shaman and Scott Whitman's score and said like, done. Like you said, you have to find it relevant and you're staging it, or especially when it's a new work. So I'm wondering if you can give me an example of a time, I guess particularly probably with new work, that you had a conversation with your writer to shape things in a different direction than they were going, and why you did that.
Well, I'll jump in. We're doing Unsinkable Molly Brown now with the Transport Group, and Dick Scanlon has completely rewritten the book, and it's all Meredith Willson music, and all None of the third songs of the songs are from the original production, but we have all this other Meredith Willson music from other songs and that are incorporated into this. And Dick Scanlon has written some new lyrics. And we've done 2 developmental productions, and we're thrilled that we're having our New York production. So this is really, I always say, on Single Molly Brown was a show people think they love because they don't really know it. And, oh, I'm gonna learn to read and write. Oh yeah, I love that show. But there's a reason why it's basically unproducible. You know, the original production now reads like an extended Beverly Hillbillies episode.
Right. Well, and also just to refresh everyone on what it's about, it's fictional, but about a woman who survives.
Yeah, it's historical fiction, and the idea of this production is to make it more true to her life. She was really a remarkable woman. Besides surviving the Titanic, she was a champion for social causes across the boards, including women's suffrage and juvenile justice systems and education, all kinds of things. Anyway, but our first developmental production of this, we actually started on the lifeboat of the Titanic, and then it went back from there, and now we still have a lifeboat Titanic scene, but later in the play, because we realized we were starting to play with the body count just way too high. So that was one of the things that Dick and I sort of realized, is that we got we know it's coming, but let's wait till we get there a little bit later. But so it starts in a different way now. But part of it is also, we've been in this process for a long time, and part of it is having, I always feel like as a director, it's part of your job to sort of ask all the questions, and even ask the obvious questions. But I also think it's part of your job to sort of say to the writer, can you explain this to me, or I don't understand this, or to say what you think needs attention. But I think it's up to them to figure out what needs to be fixed.
Yeah,
and I feel like
Michael Bright actually talks about it. He compares the profession to being an editor, that it's your job to trim and shape and choose from what you're given.
I just had a situation that addresses the very question you asked. I have a production of 9 to 5 that's running at the Savoy in the West End. And we all love the movie, and there have been some stage versions that have not quite worked. And I actually did a couple of those that I would say didn't quite work. And I couldn't put my hand on it. I knew that there's this section, I don't know if you remember the movie, that's the fantasy sequence. And each of our 3 ladies each have a song that says their fantasy about what they're going to do to the boss. Well, that was about 12 minutes of stage time. In the movie, it was fantastic, and I couldn't figure out why it wasn't working, so I asked Dolly, would we rewrite the songs? Let's take all 3 of those songs and put them into one fantasy. But it still didn't work, and it wasn't until this production in London that I realized, let's just get rid of the whole sequence. We can't compete with the movies. They did the fantasies brilliantly, and my theory was on stage, it's already a fantasy. What's happening right here, right in this proscenium, is a fantasy, so it's hard to do better. So we jettisoned those, and Pat Resnick, the book writer, and Dolly Parton, they were totally cool about it. She wrote a whole new song about something completely different, and I think it's why the production works now.
Fascinating. Sammi, what about you?
I think, it's so interesting. I'm working with a playwright who comes from a very different school of thought than I do right now, and she talks about this openly as well, so I have permission to do so. I feel like I have been trained in a way that is very much to be populist about the way that I make work, in the sense that if an audience isn't responding to something or an audience doesn't understand something, then we need to address whatever is happening in the play. And when she and I have conversations about it, she says, I'll say, the audience doesn't understand this, we should address it. And she'll say, it's okay, I wrote the play for myself and I understand it. And so the first time we had that conversation, I was dumbfounded, because I was like, it's just so antithetical to the way that I've been taught to make things. And we slowly sort of wrestled it out in a way that is very amicable, and because we love each other and have worked together for 3 years now, and found somehow a middle ground there. But it's taught me a lot about what those initial conversations are with collaborators, to figure out, do you make work in the same universe? And if you don't, is there something there that's exciting about the fact that you don't? Does the play want you to have that headbutting? And if not, maybe you shouldn't work together. But in this case, I defend the fact that we work together.
Tyne, what about for you? Has there been, can you give an example of a moment when you were like, this is where we need to be going?
Well, I can give an example of kind of an extraordinary set of circumstances
let's
around
hear it.
Usual Girls that doesn't directly answer that, but I think it was kind of remarkable, which is we started Usual Girls as a play by Ming Piper, and it tracks a young Asian American woman in the world and basically every sexual experience she has from like the age of 7 to 27. And it's wickedly funny until it's not. And we were workshopping this at the very beginning of the Me Too movement. And we were wrestling with the end of the play, and we wrestled with the end of the play for 2 years, all the way through to like our penultimate preview or something like that. And it was just kind of an extraordinary experience because as Me Too, which is an incredibly complex and nuanced set of circumstances, but as it kind of burst into the universe, especially when you're working on a play like Usual Girls, we were suddenly filled with this hope that the conversation was going to change. And so we're in workshops shaping the end of this thing, and we're all behind it, ready to go into production. And then Kavanagh and Christine Ford and that wave started to happen, and we were in another workshop, really we were about to start rehearsals for the production, and we were suddenly looking at the end of our play, and the world suddenly seemed more complicated and less clearly hopeful in terms of how this conversation about women in the world and sexual violence and how that was proceeding. So we, every day, I'm really not kidding, I would be rehearsing during the day with the actors, like staging and getting the bones of that set. And then Ming would come in with a new ending, we would get around the table.
And you're talking about like the actual dialogue, the scene. You're not talking about the visual.
No,
you're
I'm
talking
talking
about
about
the
the
context.
writing, and more importantly about the point of view. We felt such a responsibility about, and we didn't know. Ming and I were incredibly active and hopefully we think well-informed. We didn't know. We didn't know what the right thing to put into the world was, because as artists, as human beings, as women in the world, we were every day reading the news cycle, and our spirits and our brains were changing. And so I just never experienced anything like it, where the world and how quickly the conversation was moving was affecting the words on the page. It was kind of remarkable.
I mean, and then I want to talk about the flip side of like, okay, once you have the words, once you have the vision and the design, then you're pulling things out of people. And A Soldier's Play just opened on Tuesday night, and Jerry O'Connell said to me, we were talking about his character, who is a white officer in the Army, and he plays it so brilliantly, but so differently than what I think of as like the stereotypical white officer in 1944, whatever that is to me. And so we were talking about it, and he said, that's all Mr. Leon, he pulled it out of me. And I said, well, what is he doing? What do you mean he pulled it out of you? So I don't know if you can explain what you pulled out of him, but what is your rehearsal room like? That, especially if you want to talk about this cast in particular that I know you handpicked, or another cast, but like, what does the work in the room look like? What are you asking of your actors?
The room is our sacred space. I start with the intent of the writer. If it's Shakespeare and he's not around, I try to say, what would Shakespeare do if he were alive today? And then I try to serve that. When I'm working with somebody like August Wilson, I'm like, August, what do you want? Tell me, what's your intent? What are you trying to do? And as a partner, I try to help him shape that. Once we have the script, then I use that as, that's the Bible. I go into the room, that's the Bible. I don't want actors running to the writer saying, hey, could you change this to fit more of my rhythm? So I'm a slave to have to serve the Bible of what the writer intended. Once we get down the road, we find, oh, there are problems with it. So let's solve these problems. Sometimes the problem is solved by changing her sweater, or sometimes it's solved by me reblocking the scene, or sometimes we have to rewrite the scene, but it's ultimate collaboration. And when it comes to Jerry O'Connell, what I told him, I said, people have an idea about who you are. They look at David Allen Greer. That's the guy, that's the funny guy. They look at Blair Underwood. He's a sex symbol. And I was like, you're combating what people playing something you played before. Let's find your truth in this character. So with Jerry, I said, let's go to truth. And truth stands up like this, and it looks like this for this guy. And you have to be the bad guy. You represent a lot of thoughts that white folks had in 1944. But they don't know they're racist, or they don't see themselves as racist.
Right.
So I want you to stand in truth. Most actors stand beside truth, next to truth, but never in truth. So my rehearsal is about getting people to stand in truth and to find the warts of the character. Even if it's a comedy, a musical comedy, find the dark side, embrace the warts, and then the other part will be easy, because I find a lot of actors want to get the audience to like them. And it's like, if it's funny, comedy is inherent in the writing. Great drama is inherent in the writing. So stop winking at the audience. So that's what my rehearsal is like. And if you're late, everybody does 10 push-ups.
And I'll pose this question to you too, that like in finding the truth, because I think that you would all agree with that, is that a discussion? Is that go home and write a monologue of who your character is for yourself? Is that show me what you got and I'll pick from options A through D? What does it look like?
Well, I always feel like ultimately they have to do it 8 times a week, not us. So I always feel like with directing and creating any sort of work of art or anything, you sort of spiral into it. You can't quite know what the center is at the beginning. You have to sort of go around and around and around, and eventually you'll work your way to that center. But I also feel like, ultimately, we're guiding and shaping these performances, but we're not the performers, we're not the actors. And if what they're doing 8 times a week has to make sense to them. They have to believe in it, they have to have ownership of it, and they have to believe in it, because otherwise it will just be empty. So, if you have to guide it, but not control it in a way that they're not, equally, if not more than equally, participating in.
Kathleen's right. I remember when I first started directing, and some of you directors may share this, when I first started, I felt like I had to have all of the answers. And I felt like I had to get everything in the beginning of the play right before I get to the end of the play. So I had like really nice act 1 scene 1 and 2. That was great. Act 2 was fun. And then I felt like I had all the answers, and I let actors put me in a place like, well, what do you think, Mr. So for the first 7 days of my rehearsals, even if it's a play or a musical, I was like, I know that's when the actors know the least. So all I'm doing is like, you know what, we're only gonna have like 1 day table talk. Because everybody can be smart around the table. But they can't do it. So it's like, why am I wasting all that time to talk about it? So I was like, we're gonna spend 1 or 2 days around the table, and then we're on our feet. Then those first 7 days, I am watching how all those people process information. It's like, oh, that guy's gonna be a problem. Oh, she needs somebody to take her for a cup of coffee. Oh my God, that person needs love. Oh, I gotta fire that person. So I do know in the first 7 days, if I have to cut bait, and I do that early, because if I don't, it's gonna come back and get me.
Well, because you're also everyone's therapist, right?
So that's that, and then I always think that the best job as a director has, my number 1 job is to set the tone. To set the tone for the entire team. Bring the actors down, bring the designers of it, set the tone, and my other thing is, I have to be able to teach young actors or singers, and I have to be able to get veteran actors from being stuck.
Anybody else want to add about their process with an actor?
I'll just say that I think there's a particular muscle that I feel like in so many of the processes that are quick, you have to develop in relation to like how to make all of those things possible. I learned the lesson hard on encores this year, where if you really have 10 days to make a full musical, and then you have a day and a half of
Full
time.
musical.
And now they're so fully staged.
Right,
Really
like back when they started, it was it was music stands and, you know, black gowns was how they did Fierro.
But I think, you know, Encores isn't the only place now. It's like the Kennedy Center, the Muni, and frankly, most opportunities that young and emerging directors get are readings where you can direct like 25 readings in a year, and that's your work as a director. I mean, not 25 readings, but like you could just direct readings all year because those are the opportunities that are given to young directors. And how do you get the performances out of that you are seeking or that you are finding together in 29 hours? And I think that that muscle to me has been about editing myself in the sense of knowing how to prioritize you know, the 50 notes that I want to give an actor down to the 10 that I think they have the capacity to take on day 7 of our 10-day Encores process where they're running around like chickens. So it's a bit like, it's figuring out what that prioritization is and what's the biggest thing that you want to bite off to make the show you want to make.
What is, I'm wondering, also the responsibility to the audience in terms of knowing what you hope they walk away with, or sometimes when we're tackling these really difficult things and it's, if you've done a good job, it's emotional, and help an audience with what you're doing navigate and digest that. Are you thinking about that at all? And if you are, what's that thought process?
There are some designers and directors that are purposely trying to irritate the audience, and they really don't care if the audience is there or they come back. I'm not one of those. So I'm always like, I'm doing it for the people in the seats. If half the audience left, I will be hurt. So the best thing for, at least on Broadway, is 3.5 weeks of previews. So you get the chance to see, is that working the way I wanted it to? Oh, the audience is telling me other things. And then I got 5 hours tomorrow to sort of shape it. So, but at some point, I get to a place like, that's what was in my mind, or that's even better than what's in my mind, and that's what I want to greet the world with. And I don't care what any critics say, except the critics sitting in the seats. That's what and I think that every critic should try to analyze what was a director trying to do,
yes,
and were they successful at doing what they were
yes.
trying to do, instead of saying, well, this is how it was done in 1959, and they didn't do it that way, or this is how the movie was, and that, you know what I mean? So,
or
anyway.
even, so I am not a critic, though I am a theater journalist, and I completely agree. It's like, you know, even between new things, King Kong is not trying to do the same thing that Dear Evan Hansen is. Both new musicals, right? So let's not measure King Kong against Dear Evan Hansen against Hamilton. Let's measure King Kong on like, what was King Kong trying to do? What was that director trying to do? And did they do it? And did they do it well? And yeah, I just think that that's such a valid point. Jeff, you were going to
Yeah, Ruthie, just to conflate your last 2 questions.
Yes.
I agree with what everyone's saying about a young director, the biggest mistake I think I made, and I think most of us made, is trying to do too much too soon. You don't know the piece, and so the metaphor I use, it's more like painting. When you start rehearsal period, you're just whitewashing the canvas. And then you just do broad strokes the next. I try to stage the whole show in just like a week, roughly. Because people still hold their scripts, you can't really do the work. You just want to get something up on its feet. And that gives you time to go back like a painter and then do a little more detail work. Then go back again and do like pointillism. Because then with each week, everyone knows more and can be more responsible to helping you because it's so collaborative. And I think that's when you'll get the best results. And I think it's really important to create a nurturing, loving space where everyone feels safe to make mistakes, to try something. I mean, we remember Kathleen barely, there were days in the Michael Bennett days and the Tommy Walsh days when they were dictator. I mean, they were rough. Those were rough rooms. And it was getting art through intimidation and fear. And thank God those days are gone. I don't think that's the best way to get the best out of people. And for me, I guess, to answer your question about the responsibility I feel at the end of a show, it's to give people a time so when they leave the theater, they want to go see live theater again. Mm-hmm. There's so much competition with on TV to get people to leave their houses, and it's so expensive. I really feel a real responsibility to give them a time where they leave going, I can't wait to see a live show again.
I had a real turning point as a young director working on Pinter, who I am a great admirer of his body of work. But I have to be honest that as I was reading a lot of Pinter's writings, I experienced a pretty high level of disdain for his audience. And even though, as I say, I am a fan of his body of work and will continue to direct it, I remember like very instinctively committing that I was not going to be like that. And in fact, as you're expressing the opposite, I feel that they are our last collaborators. You, the audience, are our last collaborators, and that's why Previews is about the dialogue between what's happening on stage and what's happening in the house. And I feel it is my responsibility to make that dialogue as satisfying and clear and immediate as possible.
I want to talk a little bit about risky theater, because I think all of you have done extreme risk-taking in your careers, and I'll just name the most risky that comes to mind with each of you, whether it's Holler If You Hear Me, Ragtime on Ellis Island, Usual Girls, I think is so risky. In Transit was the first a cappella musical ever on Broadway. Big River was Deaf West. So
you know, the play is, you know, the music is closing. I want to thank you, Harry, for going back talking to those young folks who didn't even know enough about you, but that was a great thing, thank you. But I'm kind of disappointed that it's closing. And he said, what are you talking about? We're so proud of you. It's like you opened so many doors. You have to remember you're presenting Afrocentric work on a Eurocentric stage. And I just stopped, like, shit. He's right. You know, so you have to forget, don't get caught up in the hype, you know, don't chase great reviews. Don't always chase big box office. Because, you know, none of us gonna get out here alive.
Yeah.
So it's like, how are we serving each other through our work and our art? And we do want to get paid and fight for that, and we want to pull some young people up while we're along the way. But ultimately, I have to remember why I do the work.
Well, I also think, I bring up Holler If You Hear Me too, because I was speaking with Tom Schumacher, who's the head of Disney Theatrical, and he brought up Holler If You Hear Me when I was talking to him about The Lion King, because he goes, you know, everyone, like, we took this massive risk, and 22 years later, here we are, and we're just lucky that we found an audience. And he was saying, Holler If You Hear Me took a massive risk, was an excellent caliber show, and it closed. So there's no recipe, and also sometimes it's timing with finding your audience.
I mean, we were with Holler If You Hear Me. That was like 6 months before Hamilton.
I was just gonna say, without Holler If You Hear Me, there wouldn't really be, right?
Spoken word, and then it's like, you know, you're doing a spoken word about a troubled African American youth, and everybody from the community is singing that, versus a cast of color talking about American history. One of them is kind of safer to talk about in America just because of where we are and what we deal with in terms of racism. So sometimes you understand we're just a part of the process, you know, and just, okay, let's go to the next story. And thank God we get a chance to tell another story.
And Ruthie, I think adversity, if you embrace it, can be an artist's best friend. It's like what Kenny was saying, after 8 years being with that company, and they said, we don't think you're a director, the best thing that probably ever happened to you. I got a phone call to direct a musical, and they said, there's only one prerequisite, half the cast has to be deaf. Now this was a long time ago, this was before now we've come to accept that, and I thought they were stoned. I literally like, we're gonna do a musical and half the cast is gonna be deaf? What are you smoking? And thank God I did it. I did it for the least amount of money I ever got paid in a 99-seat theater in Los Angeles, and it was the most, to this day, fulfilling experience I've ever had. The education I had talked about diversity, working with another culture that I had no exposure to prior to this, and just one day at a time figuring out, it's the hardest thing to this day I've ever done. I left the theater more times than not in tears, thinking I have no idea what I'm doing. And thank God I didn't, because the next day we would all sit around and go, okay, the first show was actually not Big River. The first show we did was actually Oliver.
Oh,
and
wow.
It starts and Oliver's knocking on the door. The script said Oliver knocks on the door. So I'm like, come in. Oh yeah, you can't hear the knock on the door. And it was like that every day.
Right, the problem solving.
Wait, the Beatle has a staff. He has to have a staff. Oh, you're deaf, you have to sign. Oh yeah, but you have a step. So it was just solving each day, each problem that invented and created this new language of storytelling, and it was only created by us trying to solve every problem or every challenge as it occurred. Probably, well, to this day, the most fulfilling artistic thing I've ever done. But it was embracing adversity and challenges.
I mean, and because Michael Arden was in Big River, then we ended up with Deaf West Spring Awakening. So it continues, like, you manifest a possibility in that way. But Sammi, you were going to add?
I was just going to say, I guess for me, in terms of risk, my answer has like morphed in the sense that like at first it was because I didn't know better, and in the sense that I think when you're younger and you're just like, I can do anything, and so Ragtime very much came out of that mentality, because we were like, well, of course we can do it on Ellis Island, and of course we're going to ask Brian Stokes Mitchell to do it, because he'd be amazing, and of course, you know, and we were just lucky that a lot of people said yes in that case, but I think it was just that we didn't know better. But I guess thereafter, at least for me, a lot of it has come from who I'm surrounded by, in the sense that I AD'd for Diane Paulus and Rachel Chapkin, who I think of as like incredible risk takers, and I maintained great comment for Rachel, and working on that show every day for a year, where, you know, we're running into the mezzanine and jumping over seats. My brain now just works in a way where I think towards what shouldn't be possible. And, you know, I think that that's something that particularly, like coming out of the American Repertory Theater, where their mission statement is expanding the boundaries of theater, which is very much focused towards risk-taking. You know, they let me put a giant water tank on stage and all sorts of things. So it's like, I think so much of it is where your training leads your brain to go.
Our time is technically up, but I am going to go 5 minutes over. I'm warning you, because there are just a couple of things that we haven't touched on that are crucial. And Kathleen, if you want to answer about risks, I want to hear about it. Okay. We have two director choreographers on this stage, and I would be remiss not to ask you about what it is to integrate that, why at times you want to integrate it, and why at times it's important for you to bring in a choreographer, or to be the choreographer and not the director.
Well, that's a lot of First of all, what's so funny, if you were sitting up here with us, for 5 directors, this is the worst sight lines I've ever seen. It's really bad staging, to be honest, because we can't see each other, and sight lines are like so important, but anyway.
I know, I really would have preferred the view I had this morning, but here we are.
But anyway, I apologize for everyone had to see this fat while I had to look over here. No vanity. You know, for me, I guess the best way it's an influence as a choreographer, my direction. Now I don't really choreograph as much anymore, because I do think it's a young person's game, and I'd rather get someone really young who's going to inspire me and do things that my body can't do anymore. But what's great about directing is you're only limited by your imagination. And as a dancer, choreography, I think you're limited to a great extent, your physicality, what you can't do anymore. But how it's helped me the most is working with a designer, because even if you're not dancing, I think in my shows, I like when the set is choreographed and the set is dancing. So I think it's been a great aid that way. I mean, I'm so naive, sometimes I sit and watch plays, and then they like stop for a scene and they play music and you wait while they change the scenery. I'm like, wow, we can't do that. We don't get to do that. It has to be cinematic. And also working with the writers, sometimes we are working a little outside in, because we have to get from here to here, and we may need their help. How do we get there? And so I think it's the movement that the whole show feels like it's choreographed from beginning to end.
And I feel that we're so lucky, because like Jeff and I both, we were both performers, we were both assistant choreographers and choreographers to various directors, and so it's this amazing apprenticeship that I feel that I had, because I got to see Hal Prince, Michael Blakemore, Jerry Sachs, Susan Schulman, Scott Ellis, Jack O'Brien. I got to sit there and watch all of these people. How do they behave in audition? How do they behave in tech? How do they run a production meeting? How do they talk to writers? How do they talk to designers? How do they give notes and previews? And you're sort of absorbing all of that because, you know, it's a very, very lonely, solitary profession.
Yes.
There's only one of us in the room, as opposed to actors and musicians or, you know, even a team of designers, even if their specialties are different. And so I feel like I'm constantly thinking back to all the directors I've observed and how they behaved and what you can glean from that and it's like anything I say, it's like with parenting. You sort of read all these books about parenting and you go, oh, that works for me, that doesn't work for me. And I sort of feel like I had the advantage of sort of seeing all these directors at work and sort of taking what works for me and seeing how I might do things differently.
My last question is, the entertainment industry is an industry of awards, and whether or not you agree with who's chosen at the end of the day, I think that whether reading reviews or looking at awards, people are trying to understand the logic that goes behind a good or bad review and an award or not an award. So asking the people who do it every day, what makes good direction? When you see it, what is it that makes good direction? Jeff, we'll start with you if you don't mind.
For me, the most important thing and the hardest thing to find is just a consistency in tone. That everyone's on the same page. The lights, the costumes, the set, the acting, that it all marries to the text and supports the text. And easier said than done.
I think my answer is a deliberate intention and an attention to detail feels incredibly important.
Sort of the same thing, a show that knows what it is and knows who it's for. I have nothing.
I think all of that, and a show that's full of authentically surprising moments. And if I were to stand in the back of the house looking at the stage, I would notice that 100% of the audience are looking the same place.
All right, we're gonna have to end it there. Thank you all so much for being here. Thank you all for being here. We are gonna take a quick photo on the stage, and then if you have questions for these people, there is another panel coming in here, so please go to the hallway. They all have to exit that way. Thank you.
You take this, just hold it. Let me